This is Newstalk ZB News.
Good morning, it's 7:30. I'm Neva Reddy Manu. Jordan and the United Arab Emirates have begun distributing aid to Palestinians in Gaza amid humanitarian concerns. Israel's military has announced a tactical pause in fighting in 3 parts of Gaza and says it'll open aid corridors in areas it's not operating in. 25 tonnes of aid has already been dropped, including via parachutes, during a 10-hour window. Geopolitical analyst Geoffrey Miller told Ryan Bridge it's a drop in the water compared to what's actually required.
There's a lot of aid that is held up at the border, is already within Gaza to some degree, but is not being allowed for further distribution, and that's what desperately is needed.
This is Newstalk ZB News.
Good morning, it's 8:30. I'm Neva Reddy Manu. About 100 trucks from Egypt, loaded with food and other supplies, are being held at the Palestinian border after calls to increase the flow of aid. Israel's military has announced a tactical pause in fighting in 3 parts of Gaza and says it'll open aid corridors in areas it's not operating in. Geopolitical analyst Geoffrey Miller says Israel is stopping all trucks at checkpoints, still being very careful in what it allows into the strip.
That's always Israel's argument, that Hamas controls the food aid and that weapons are being smuggled in with the aid, etc.
The issues, the interviews, and the insight. Ryan Bridge on Early Edition. Newstalk ZB.
Good morning, 6 after 5. Welcome to your Monday morning. Israel under pressure over starvation in Gaza. Jordan and the UAE are helping them out. Geoffrey Miller on that shortly. 14 minutes after 5.
Ryan Bridge.
Jordan and the UAE have begun airdrops into Gaza to deliver aid. It comes after the Israeli military announced it'll open humanitarian corridors into the Strip and a tactical pause in military activity in 3 specific areas. Geoffrey Miller is a geopolitical analyst with us this morning. Geoffrey, good morning.
Good morning, Ryan.
Good to have you on the program. So is this going to be enough, do you think, to address the problem that is clearly happening, and that's starvation?
Well, look, it's something. Something is better than nothing. The UAE and Jordan dropped around 25 tonnes of aid into Gaza overnight. And look, that's a drop in the ocean considering the scale of need. These 2 pauses, so there's a 10-hour pause, or humanitarian pause, or tactical pause, Israel calls it, in 3 areas of Gaza. And then there's a 17-hour window where there will be a humanitarian corridor effectively allowed for the distribution of aid. I think both of those are going to be useful, but in the end, they only really will help if Israel allows more aid to come into Gaza, and that's really where the hold-up is. Around 100 trucks apparently went in from Egypt overnight, but they're being held up at the border, held up at one of the checkpoints, and Israel is just being very, very careful in what it allows into Gaza, and that's really where the problem comes from. There's a lot of aid that is held up at the border, is already within Gaza and to some degree, but is not being allowed for further distribution, and that's what desperately is needed. Israel absolutely needs to allow that aid to reach the Palestinian people in Gaza, because the scale of suffering is just horrific at the moment.
Absolutely, it is. One of the things that the IDF always talks about is Hamas and what their control of aid centres or involvement with aid centres and distribution centres could mean, and also what's potentially coming in across the border.
Yes, I mean, that's always Israel's argument, that Hamas controls the food aid and that weapons are being smuggled in with the aid, etc., etc., etc. But I think we just need to take one look at some of the horrific images that are coming out of Gaza and being shown on a nightly basis on our TV screens around the world. And we look at those calls from over 100 aid organisations last week. I think the calls really reached a crescendo last week, and Israel is actually responding to the pressure that has been placed on it from the international community. And some of the things that have been coming out, I mean, France's recognition of a Palestinian state was another point of pressure. So it is interesting that Israel is actually responding to the pressure, and I think we need to keep the pressure on. The international community needs to keep the pressure on, because on Friday the ceasefire negotiations in Qatar between Hamas and Israel and the United States collapsed, and Israel and the United States effectively took their ball and went home. Steve Witkoff said Israel would now look for alternative options to free the hostages. It didn't sound sound good. And just within the last couple of hours, Donald Trump has said Israel will need to make a decision. Well, that sounds quite ominous to me. So I think we need to keep our eye on the bigger picture here, which is those ceasefire negotiations. And I do think, if we're looking at New Zealand's perspective, New Zealand can play a small part in all of that. Winston Peters said that last week. He said that New Zealand can and must play its part. And so I think New Zealand needs to think about what it can do, and I think New Zealand needs to also think about its relations with countries in the Middle East. New Zealand has good relations with the Gulf states, the likes of the United Arab. So I think Winston Peters needs to be pulling on all the diplomatic levers here.
Absolutely. I appreciate your time this morning, Jeffrey Miller, who's a geopolitical analyst on the program this morning, just gone 18 minutes after 5.